Before there were superheroes, before bright galaxies filled the sky, even before the first planets were born, the universe was nothing but darkness, not the familiar darkness of night, but an endless void, where light had never existed and life had never begun. In that absolute silence, something awakened. Its name was Nox. No one knows where it came from. It had no homeworld, no species, no history. Nox existed as a piece of the void itself, older than time. For billions of years it drifted alone inside the endless darkness. Until one day, light appeared. Gigantic cosmic beings known as the architects entered the young universe. They carried the first stars, the first galaxies, and the seeds of life. Light began spreading across space, but to Nox, it was not a miracle. It was an invasion. Awakened from his kingdom of darkness, Nox watched the massive beings shaping a new universe. And for the first time, in his endless existence, he felt anger. From that anger, a terrible idea was born. If light wished to rule the universe, then darkness would create an army of its own. The first stars began to burn in the young universe. Galaxies lit up like massive torches across the endless void. The architects, gigantic beings with the power of creation, traveled across space, planting the seeds of life on newborn planets. Wherever they went, darkness was pushed back. Light spread. Life began to grow. But to Nox, this was not the beginning of a new era. It was the destruction of his kingdom. For billions of years before that, the void was everything that existed. There was no sound, no light, no change. Only pure darkness. But now the architects were turning the universe into something completely different. Planets full of life. Burning suns. Creatures with their own will. Nox watched it all, and felt an emotion he had never known before. Hatred. If light continued to spread, his ancient darkness would slowly disappear from the universe, and Nox could not accept that. In the cold emptiness between the stars he began to think, not like a god, but like someone preparing for war. From the endless darkness surrounding him, Nox began to create the first piece of the army he imagined. A living creature. Not made of flesh and bone, but made of living darkness. In the cold emptiness between forming galaxies, Nox began testing his power. He raised his hand, and the darkness around him started to move. Not like an ordinary shadow, but like living liquid. Streams of void twisted together, thickening and merging into a dark creature that trembled as if it had just been born. The creature had no bones, no fixed shape. It moved like a living fluid, constantly shifting its form. Nox looked down at his first creation. In his unseen eyes, it was the beginning of an empire. The dark creature crawled along his arm and spread into the surrounding space as if searching for something to attach to. Nox quickly realized something important. The creature was incomplete. It needed something else to survive. A host. A body. A living being to bond with. And in that moment Nox understood their true purpose. They would not simply be weapons. They would be parasites. Creatures capable of attaching to any life form, merging with their host and turning them into warriors of darkness. Nox gazed toward distant galaxies, where the architects were planting the seeds of life. A cold smile formed within the void. Light was creating life, and he had created something that hunts life. The first creatures of darkness began spreading across the universe. At first they were only small masses of living liquid drifting quietly through the endless void. But when they touched the first living beings of the universe, everything changed. They merged with their hosts. Darkness wrapped around the host's body, slipping into every cell and every thought. When the bond was complete, the host became stronger than ever before. Faster, stronger, more dangerous. From the shadows, Nox watched everything. Each dark creature carried a piece of his awareness. Through them, he could sense every planet, every life form, every battle. His army was growing. The first worlds began to fall into chaos. Young civilizations were taken over by warriors of darkness. The parasitic creatures spread from host to host, like a cosmic infection. The architects finally noticed what was happening. Across distant galaxies, they saw planets they once filled with life now covered by a living black substance. Something that had never existed before. Something that was not normal life. When they traced the origin of these creatures, they discovered a terrifying truth. In the heart of the ancient darkness, a being was waiting for them. A god of the void. And now, he had an army. News of the dark parasitic creatures spread across the universe faster than any spacecraft. Planets that once overflowed with life were now silent worlds. On their surfaces, creatures covered in living darkness moved like a perfectly synchronized army. No fear, no hesitation, only the will of Nox. The architects gathered in an ancient galaxy, where the first stars of the universe had once been born. They had witnessed billions of years of cosmic evolution, yet they had never seen anything like this army. Because these were not simply creatures. They were a perfect parasitic species. Every time a dark creature found a new host, their power grew stronger. The warriors created from that bond became faster, stronger, and nearly impossible to destroy. Some planets tried to resist. Ancient civilizations unleashed all their weapons. Flying cities and orbital fortresses fired massive beams of energy into space. But it was useless. The army of darkness kept growing. From afar, Nox watched everything like a king observing the expansion of his empire. Galaxies once filled with light slowly began falling into shadow. And for the first time in cosmic history, even the architects began to realize a terrifying truth. Perhaps they had created a universe they could no longer control. The war between light and darkness finally erupted. The architects, gigantic beings who once ignited the stars of the universe, moved across galaxies like living suns. Every step shook space itself, and every motion of their hands could create or destroy entire planets. But this time, they were not facing an ordinary enemy. In front of them stood billions of dark parasitic creatures. These creatures attached themselves to every form of life: alien warriors, ancient giant beasts, even monsters born from the cores of planets. Entire planets became battlefields. Galaxies burned. The light of stars was swallowed by waves of living darkness. Some architects attempted to destroy entire infected planets. They wiped out worlds they had once created. But even that could not stop the army of Nox. Every time a host died, the dark creature simply crawled out, searching for a new body. The war lasted for thousands of years. And then something unimaginable happened. Even the architects' beings, almost like gods, began to lose. At the edges of the universe, galaxies that once shined brightly were now consumed by darkness. Nox stood within the void, watching his empire spread across the stars. The light was fading, and it seemed that the universe was about to return to eternal darkness once again. As darkness nearly covered the entire universe, something strange began to happen. Among the billions of parasitic creatures created by Nox, some started to change. At first the change was small. A few of them no longer completely obeyed Nox's will. When they bonded with hosts, they didn't just control them anymore. They began to learn from them. Emotions, thoughts, willpower, things they had never experienced before. Over centuries, this change quietly spread. Some of the parasites started developing their own consciousness. They were no longer just tools of darkness. They began asking questions. Why fight for Nox? Why destroy all life? One of these creatures bonded with an ancient warrior on a distant planet. When their two minds merged, something unprecedented appeared. A balance. No longer a controlled host. No longer a dominating parasite. But a true bond. News of these different symbiotic creatures spread across galaxies. Some of them began fighting against the army of darkness. For the first time, after thousands of years of war, Nox's army had traitors. From the void, Nox sensed the change. A new feeling appeared within him. Not anger, but danger. Because for the first time, the army he created might become the force that destroys him. The rebellion began quietly. The parasitic creatures that once served Nox as perfect weapons began turning against the dark god who created them. Across galaxies, new bonds between parasites and hosts began forming, not control, but unity. New warriors were born, no longer soldiers of darkness, but beings with their own will. When news of the rebellion reached the heart of the void, Nox finally appeared on the battlefield. His body was wrapped in ancient darkness, larger than planets. He looked at the creatures he had created, the children of darkness, and for the first time in billions of years, they no longer obeyed him. The final battle erupted between the god of the void and his own army. Rebel symbiotic creatures merged with warriors across the universe, forming a force that had never existed before. Light and darkness blended together. A new power was born. After a war that stretched across entire galaxies, Nox was finally defeated and imprisoned in the deepest shadows of the universe. But the parasitic creatures he created continued to exist. No longer weapons of the void. No longer servants of a god. They became a new species of the universe. A species capable of choosing to become heroes. Or monsters. And their story was only beginning. If you want to see the next part about the most famous symbiotic creatures in this universe, comment number 1 and I'll continue the story.